To our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Your questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday evening, Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. We're so excited that you've taken the time to join us. My name is Dr. Roxanne Lowe, and I'm joined by my co-host and husband, Father Nicholas Lowe.
Hello, everyone.
And together we serve the community of St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, Florida. This radio show has actually been a really wonderful opportunity for us to really cast a wide net, an extension of our ministry, and being able to reach 139 countries. It's pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to thank you, all of the listeners, for being a part of tonight's show. Well, before we get started with tonight's topic, we really want to ask that you join the conversation. We're always interested in your feedback, your questions, and your insights are always so fabulous in the chat room, especially. So feel free to give us a call, 855-237-2346. Again, that number is 855-237-2346. You can also ask questions in the chat room. Simply go to ancientfaith.com/live. So we want to remind you to stay connected to us. We have a Facebook page, and we often put daily inspirations, blogs, various information, great articles. And so feel free to check it out. It's Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. And if you like the page, feel free to share it. And you can leave us your feedback on the page as well. But tonight, we're going to talk about something that I think is probably in most people's minds and souls, weighing heavy on them, in anticipation of this beautiful holiday season, what's supposed to be a magical holiday season.
A wonderful time of the year.
A wonderful time of the year, as Nick spoke about last week. He spoke about it being the most wonderful time of the year, yet for many, the holidays, as we talked about last week, bring so much stress and a lot of anxiety. Mm-hmm. But one thing in specific that we're going to hone in on tonight is how to deal with the difficult relationships that we have to encounter over the holidays. For many, and our minds begin revving up just as soon as the weather begins to change. We start to anticipate the stress we felt last year. We remember the tough moments that went south. We stress over the behavior of certain family members or certain people that we feel burdened by and obligation to connect with, and even people that we don't always see eye to eye with. So for many, these difficult relationships are a real struggle over the holidays.
Exactly. And I hear so often, even just from parishioners, that, for many people, this time of the year becomes such a stress because they're dealing with different personalities, different family members that they may have not seen since either over the summer or maybe since last Christmas. And so when you get the dynamics of all the different people that are coming in, and their emotional health, their well-being, their attitudes, their personality, when you get kind of everyone together in an already heightened emotional state, sometimes Christmas can be stressful and it can be very difficult. And that's one of the things that we really wanted to kind of hone in on this, the final show of Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls this year, was to talk about just how do we deal with difficult people throughout the year, but especially as we're approaching this season of the Nativity of Christ. How do we deal with those kind of people that really we don't really have much control over, but that are in our lives?
So it's been said, and I think this is rather interesting to share because I've got probably at least 5 different folks in the last couple of months who've sort of talked about the difficulties they have in navigating their extended families when they come around this time of year. But it's been said that families often go back to a means of relating to one another that was typical of their adolescence. So when adult children are coming back together with their parents, as now having families of their own, they go back to a most familiar stage when the family unit was last still together. Before the kids went off to college, what was it? It was the adolescence stage. And so often when family units come back together, we see behaviors that are reminiscent of when that family was in the stage of adolescence with their children. And so that kind of adds to what I'm going to sort of refer to in the beginning of there are a few unspoken rules that I think each family lives by. And this is, I would say, one of many of the roots of struggle for family conflict in dealing with difficult relationships. But each family has a set of characteristics that really define them and set them apart from outsiders. Traditions that are, really understood by each family member, yet they are never stated. It's their typical means of relating as a unit. It's a system. And there's even a model of understanding people in psychology called family systems theory. And so this is a bit of a take on that, but examples might include that certain families, have a tendency to do what? They respect their elders, maybe, or they have a preference for formal hospitality over a more laid-back, casual style of relating to one another. Perhaps they have traditional gender roles or family roles over more progressive ones. Even their conversational characteristics can define them in unspoken ways, like the use of sarcasm might be something very typical, or perhaps there's a lot of criticism that's sort of thrown back and forth toward one another, or a lot of competition that sort of is a theme in the family. And so when those unspoken rules kind of come together with another set of unspoken rules in two different cultures, it can be a little bit earth-shattering.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is, I think, is if you have, for example, if you grew up with a way that at Christmas time you had certain traditions, and not necessarily like traditions of a certain meal that you would have or certain gifts, but maybe there were traditions in which you communicated. In some families, maybe they communicate through sarcasm, or maybe they communicate through that when an elder of the family comes in, everyone kind of stands up and greets people. I remember that's how I kind of grew up, but that the elder of the family, not even just the elder within being my father, but really the elder within the family, whenever they would enter, they would always sit at the head of the table. There was no questions asked as to where they would sit at the dinner table. So there's certain traditions, and sometimes in the way in which we see those, if we're coming into a family, that also, believe it or not, can cause stress, because it might be different than the way in which we grew up or the way in which we were raised, and seeing how people communicate, even seeing how siblings communicate, and how that impacts your role and your way of connecting, even how people clean up after the dinner table, how that looks like can also be stressful, or at least allow sometimes a stress to create in our minds about that relationship, or even the expectations.
Absolutely.
What are the expectations that I have when I'm going to an event, or if someone's coming to my house?
Absolutely. I think those unspoken rules, what you just hit the nail on the head when you said expectations, because the unspoken rules that a family lives by create their expectations of those who enter the family, what they are hoping they do or expecting they do. It becomes the shoulds in their conversation. Well, he or she should be doing this right now. She should be doing that right now. And it creates a lot of resentment and hostility and upsettedness when the intention was really actually a positive one. Mm-hmm. But those unspoken rules are powerful. Mm-hmm. And so that is one of the many roots, I think, that leads to a lot of family conflict.
And so one of the things that we encourage you to do in this show, and we've been doing this, I can't believe this has been 1 year, Roxanne, now that we've been on the air doing this show, is to join the conversation. We want to be a resource for you. So call in. You can call in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. 2346. And listen, if you're uncomfortable about sharing your name, I mean, you could use an anonymous name or someone else's name. It's not a problem. We just want to be a resource for you, because we want the holiday season to be obviously about as the Bible calls, the indescribable gift, that about Jesus Christ. But so often these difficult relations can kind of get us off course throughout this holiday season. So this is just a resource for you. You can also join in by emailing us. Just simply go to ask@ancientfaith.com. Or if you'd like to, we'd love to have you join our chat room. We've already got quite a few people in our chat room. Just simply go to ancientfaith.com and then click on the Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls banner. And then right there will be a little link to our chat room. Just join the conversation. Like I said, this is just a resource for you. So once again, that phone number is 1-855-237-2346.
So we've talked about unspoken rules, and this is a very large topic that we've just sort of skimmed over briefly. I know we're going to talk more in depth.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you, Roxanne. I think some of the things that when people are listening is just trying to understand, what do I, as I'm looking at these unspoken, expectations or unspoken rules that take place in the house, kind of take me a little bit more into what that may look like, or at least, how do I start observing what those unspoken rules may be in a house that either in my own home or, for that matter, that the home that I might be visiting during the holiday season?
Good question. Okay, so one of the ways I'd ask you to think about it is, interestingly enough, let's talk about how we show love. There is an unspoken rule in each family about how they show love. Many of you might have heard of, we've talked about it before, there's the book by Dr. Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages, and this is about how individuals give and receive love. It's a wonderful book. If you haven't read it, we strongly encourage it. But if you stretch that concept out, it can be seen in the ways families give and receive love. And there is a systematic approach within family units about how they have typified giving love and receiving love. And so think about it this way. Some families are big on, let's say, acts of service. Maybe they're doing something to help you out. Perhaps they are cleaning your kitchen. They're the ones, asking if they can vacuum or help you serve your guests. They are doing a lot and they are giving a lot. And yes, let me remind you, they are probably expecting a lot. Not because they're bad people, but because the way that we typically give love is the way we typically expect to receive love. Mm-hmm. Okay, so other families might be big on, say, gift giving. Okay, here's another unspoken rule of showing love. To them, taking the time to pick out a special gift that says, I know you. Mm-hmm. That's how they show their love. And they may not necessarily feel the love from a check or a money placed in a card that you've given them, even if it's $300. So when two love languages are colliding in two family systems in two different cultures, there's often a big letdown. There could be judgment, and I'd say even like frustration. We get upset. Say, let's talk about Aunt Judy. And I had this come up today. I was talking to somebody, and obviously this is a different name, but, say Aunt Judy wasn't really complimenting the food that or all the efforts that were made to sort of make this wonderful holiday dinner in the last year. She didn't come bearing gifts, and she really didn't help out in the kitchen. Instead, she remained the very engaged one, sitting down in the corner of the room, just waiting to give her undivided attention to talking or playing games with the host and the members of the host's family. Mm-hmm. Her love language was clearly quality time. Mm-hmm. As a result, she didn't appreciate the huge dinner with the huge cleanup or having been given the perfect gift. She just wanted to sit down and spend time.
I love that, Roxanne. Let's talk a little bit more about this, about how families have their own individual love languages, because I think that's so beautiful that as individuals we can, and we do, but how also we as families, we have love languages. But before we go any further, we have someone that called in, Despina, calling us from, I believe, New York. Despina, how are you?
Hi, how are you? Good.
We're doing great. How are you?
Great. Congratulations on being on the air for a year. I can't believe a year has gone by, right?
We can't either. We can't either, trust me.
I have a question. I don't mean to bring you off topic, but for example, at this time of year, I have to attend a lot of holiday work parties, like a departmental one, a company work party, a group work party. In fact, I just went to one yesterday. And talking about dealing with difficult relationships with your coworkers. So, for example, yesterday I saw all my coworkers like kissing up to my boss, but then when they're like, let's say that she's not around, everyone's gossiping and talking about her and being, let's say, not as polite, right? So then this brings up a lot of frustration for me because I'm not really good at kissing up. Mm-hmm. And so even my husband was like, yeah, you're frowning, put on be less of a Grinch. And I'm like, but this is ridiculous. And so my frustration can add up to like resenting, the people who kiss up more and so forth. And you see it more in these, when you're all forced to be together for the company or departmental Christmas party and so forth. So I guess my question is, do you have any when you're forced to be stuck in these social situations with your coworkers, do you have any advice to kind of get through it? Though it's not necessarily a family situation, you still kind of see your coworkers well a lot of the time.
Despin, I love your question. And actually, as Roxanne and I were listening to you speak, we were just smiling because what we didn't want this show to be just about would just be about families. I mean, we realize, and obviously, that there are relationships that are existing at work, among friends, and yes, Christmas parties. And for a lot of people, these are not things that people necessarily look forward to, or when they do, sometimes it's just one of those things that you just kind of grind, put your head down, and kind of just go through it. One of the things that I would share with you is, you're right. This idea that we have to use your language to try to to brown nose or to kiss up to our employer. We see that all the time, and unfortunately, we live in a world, and I think all of us at some point in our lives, or even consciously or even subconsciously at times, are doing that. We there's a yearning that we have emotionally. That's shared not only through Scripture, but also in psychology, about the need of to be accepted, to be impressed, to do the impressing, to get that response from people. I think you're very wise, though, Despina, and I would congratulate you. I don't think that you should engage in that, but I also would be very cautious on the flip side that you don't allow yourself to create a barrier between you and your coworkers, or for that matter, you and your boss. What do I mean by that? The Bible says in the book of Timothy, and Timothy, just so everyone who's listening knows, and many of you may already know this, but Timothy is one of the few books that are written in the Bible that are not written to a people. It's written to a pastor. Timothy is a priest. And so Paul writes the book of Timothy to his friend named Timothy. And he gives Timothy he kind of says, this is what I want you to preach a lot about. To put it in today's language, he'd say, this is what I want you to preach about with people that are going to Christmas parties or that they're dealing with difficult relationships. And he says this, and it's just an amazing statement. He says, I say to you, don't get involved in ignorant or foolish arguments that only starts fight. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone, to be able to teach, and be patient with difficult people. And I think that's something that's so important, is that you're not obviously going to have a sermon to those people that are your coworkers at that time, but I would say that you are always wanting to be your best you, and in what that means is in your own walk of faith, you're saying to yourself, you know what, that may not be for me, but I'm not going to judge that person. I'm not going to judge those people. I'm not going to allow it to steal my joy or my happiness. And in those situations, I'm also reminding myself of really, why is there a Christmas? Why are we even having a Christmas party? It's because there's actually a Savior who saved me and saved all of us from our lives. And so the devil loves to mess up relationships. That's what he does. And so just be cautious that the principles that you're standing for are absolutely correct, but don't let it allow you to kind of lose or steal that joy that God yearns for you to have in that moment. Roxanne, you want to add a little bit to that, because you might have a different perspective. Oh, sure.
I mean, similar perspective. But, I guess I sort of live by this philosophy of, do what works. I find myself saying that over and over and over again, do what works. If in being around this person, I lose my joy, my peace, and sabotage my relationships with work colleagues, then it isn't working. And so I have to figure out how to navigate that relationship in a way that works for my overall goal. What's my goal in being there? I want to be received well. I want to be respected. I want to have integrity. So I think we don't necessarily need to embrace someone we are not particularly fond of, because let's be honest, not every soul connects in the world. In fact, there are some very strongly opposing characteristics in certain people that sort of push us away. We just need to respect them enough so that in being with them, all peace isn't lost. Mm-hmm. So again, in dealing with those difficult relationships, you aren't necessarily relating to them for you. You're there for another cause, which is my job. So I need to do what works for my job, for my overall sort of goal of being in this company and being received well. Mm. And if my thoughts are about this person are making me less than tolerant, highly irritable, or bitter, then kind of my overall efforts for my ultimate goal is lost. So I try to keep in mind, kind of do what works for my overall goal.
I like that, Roxanne. That's great.
Yes, thank you. That's a very positive way of looking. I knew if I called in, I would get a fresh perspective, especially when I saw the little pop-up on my phone that said tonight's topic was dealing with difficult relationships. I thought, oh, boy, this is perfect for me. But I'm sorry to bring you off topic from family relationships.
That's great.
I've definitely enjoyed hearing
those are great.
Yeah.
That's very much on topic. And one of the things people complain about, Despina, in these difficult relationships is oftentimes their work relationships.
Right. Absolutely.
And the holiday parties. So that's right on topic.
Mm-hmm. And how we deal with our employers and our coworkers really throughout the year. I mean, because it's not just one-time events, it's how we deal with them on a day-to-day basis. So great question, Despina. Thank you so much, Despina, for supporting this ministry.
Yeah.
We love that you called in, and so please continue to do so.
Yeah, have a happy new year, and I look forward to hearing your 2018 shows.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Please share us with your friends as well.
Sure. Bye.
Bye, Despina. So we've been talking about, kind of the roots of some difficult relationships. And I think one of the things that I think, if we're talking about a tree of difficult relationships and conflict, one of the roots is those unspoken rules we've sort of talked about here. Another, and just one of, I think, three of many, are our current emotional state at the time that we're trying to relate during these holiday get-togethers, holiday events. It's whether or not we're stressed, tired, or just mentally spent. Our demeanor is very different during those times, and how we receive people is different when we are emotionally spent.
This is so, when we were preparing for this show, everyone, this was one of those things that I think doesn't get discussed as often as it probably should be, and it's one of those things that I think people need to be aware, because where our emotional health is where we reside, and if we understand that our thoughts oftentimes become our actions, then being aware of just where our emotional health is, how we're feeling, what we're concerned about. I mean, oftentimes we're kind of creating a story of what potentially might happen, and we reside in that. We almost reside in the potential or what we think might happen. It's almost like a movie that we kind of play in our mind. The problem with that is that you will base your actions in a situation on that. So as you're leading up to an event, whether this is throughout the year or at Christmas time, if you're stressed about being with family members that you may not get along with and you're not really that fond of looking forward to seeing, as you begin to consciously and subconsciously deal with the stress of having to see them or to be around them, that stress will relate in actions. And so you might see at times, and maybe throughout your life, you might see people, or maybe even yourself, that will overcompensate in a negative way at a holiday event or at a party. In other words, you might see people that might get in a little screaming match, or might have a major argument over a political discussion or over a religious conversation. These things, because it's almost like we've created in our mind this idea or this stress about what potentially might happen, and we reside in that. So I think, Roxanne, what we were talking about before the show, I think, we just really want to emphasize this enough, is just to be cautious and be cognizant of your emotional health. What's kind of going on in your life? And I just want to add a little bit to this too, Roxanne, if you'll allow me. It's just that is oftentimes in arguments and in difficult relationships, the stressors, most often what we are claiming is the problem oftentimes is not. There's something that's often that could be even a deeper seated issue that we're not aware of, that we're not paying attention to. So when we talk about being aware of your emotional health is also to challenge you to say, is there something more to this that's kind of stressing me out, or something that's frustrating me? Is it something that I just have experienced in the past? Whatever it is, try your best to kind of just like look at yourself from an outside perspective and say, what is really behind all this? And it might help. So
what you're saying is, that concept of thinking about your thinking, it's it's such a powerful tool, but I feel so underused, in this day and age, because we are so distracted. We are a distracted culture. But the power of monitoring our emotions, our thoughts, like you were talking about, Nick, so eloquently, our energy levels, if you catch yourself, I always say that you have to catch yourself when you're becoming negative or judgmental about somebody. If you've been doing it for a couple of hours, it's sort of, too late, because you've already established resentment. You've begun the bitterness. You've begun detaching or disconnecting or making, snide negative comments in some way. So it's too late. And if we're monitoring ourselves enough, we can catch ourselves at the forefront. And doesn't the Bible speak so much about guarding our thoughts?
Right. And that's something that we oftentimes share on our show, is the fact that St. Paul is very cautious. In fact, Christ says that the gateway to our soul is through our mind and being aware of what we're thinking, how we're feeling. And so the challenge that we have to do is to be looking internally. Because if science shows that we have anywhere between 12,000 and 80,000 thoughts that go through our mind, many of those thoughts we're not even conscious of, but yet they're impacting us. They're impacting our actions. They're impacting our attitudes, our feelings. And so because of that, if we're not constantly taking inventory of what am I thinking about? Like what are the things that are causing my stress level to kind of go up because I'm going to meet, Aunt Ruthie, in a couple of weeks, or that I'm going to have this work conversation. And this is one thing I will tell you that in the workforce, it's so prevalent because people you almost have these make-believe in your mind, make-believe conversations that you're going to have with your employer before you actually have that with your employer, and you build this stress over about a potential conversation you may have that may or may not ever go that way. Yet, as you're approaching that situation, because you're thinking about it and stressing about it, it can create a great deal of just unneeded stress in your life. And so as you're approaching this holiday season, and really throughout your life, is the thing that we're trying to tell you is just be aware. Sometimes, be your own priest to you, be your own counselor to you. Ask yourself, what are you thinking about? What's weighing heavy on your heart? That's one of the questions I always ask people when they come to confession is, what's weighing heavy on your thoughts? What's weighing heavy on your heart? Or
why did my mood suddenly change?
Right, exactly. I think that's a great, that's a great question to ask. And so
I think what's often the signal is that our mood shifts. We're usually not so aware of our thinking, unfortunately, but when our mood shifts, it's a key that, I was just thinking something that made me upset. And talking about managing the expectations, that's huge. If I think about my thoughts as becoming judgmental and I catch them at the beginning, I catch myself going negative, I can reevaluate in light of, maybe they do have a different set of unspoken rules in their family tradition. Perhaps what they're doing is not an intentional slight toward me. Perhaps it's not something for me to personalize, but rather to externalize and sort of understand and take a better look at. And when we understand things a bit more conceptually, it is easier to embrace somebody because we understand that the intention was not so negative. I had a patient, actually, a client the other, 2 years ago, and I remember she was so bothered by her mother-in-law. She just had these expectations that, their quote unquote down home country style, and her quote unquote lack of a filter, just always set her over the edge. And so she had an expectation every time the mother-in-law was coming into town that she was going to have to face their down home country style and his mother's lack of a filter. And, this created a lot of anxiety in anticipation of these visits. And because of that, everyone was a bit on edge, and, nobody knew sort of what to do because husband wasn't sure how to control mom, and mom had no idea that she had a lack of filter, and wife was just unsettled because of the lack of filter. So it became this very anxiety provoking intensity that nobody could manage. And it ended up being a very vicious cycle that led to a family dispute, and now the mother-in-law is disengaged from the family unit because they were unsure of how to navigate these tough waters. Something so common, but because of the expectations being so rigidly adhered to, this difference in style and difference of relating that we couldn't work around, we couldn't make room for, it ended up leading to estrangement that is still causing them stress today.
Right, and I think so many of the problems that we see in relationships, and we've talked about this before, Roxanne, is that they happen in the expectations. It's what we expect in people to do. And I think one of the challenges that we have to do is just keep our expectations in line, because we are placing sometimes some undue or almost an unattainable expectation on people that really only God can fulfill. And I think whether it be through our spouse, whether it be through friends, we've got to recognize that God is the only one that can meet all of our needs. And if those expectations, when we put our faith in individuals, sadly, because we all, as the Bible says, we all fall short of his glory, because of that, oftentimes we're disappointed. And so I think the key is managing those expectations. I want to encourage all of you too, as we've had some people call in, and we've got a lot of people in our chat room, please join the conversation. You can do so by calling in at 1-855-237-2346. Please don't feel, if you're uncomfortable with not sharing your name, you don't have to. We just want to be a resource for you. It's 1-855-237-2346. You can also come join our chat room, share questions with us. We will be more than happy to answer them. This show is all about merging faith and psychology together. We do things that I think is unique to ancient faith, and really unique into, I think, the faith world, is where you have both of these fields kind of coming together to kind of help us in our walk of faith, to kind of bring some practicality to our walk of faith. So please call in or join our chat room. You can also send us an email at ask@ancientfaith.com. And so we want to kind of go back, though, Roxanne, for just a few moments to talking about the notion that our families have their own love languages. I think that's so important. That maybe as you're, if in your own family, identify what may be those love languages. Like when you were growing up, or even now, is a love language that you would say is so prevalent? Is words of affirmation? Was gift giving another love language? Was that a big thing that you guys did? Was it acts of service? Just like you have your own love language as an individual, we also have that as a family. For me and my family, it was big on acts of service. Whenever my mom would make the meal, she'd put up a spread that there wasn't a empty space. I mean, we couldn't even actually eat at the dining room table because there was just so much food there. But one of the things that we knew that was an unspoken thing is that we never wanted to see my mom work afterwards. So we would automatically pick up all of the dishes, me and my siblings, and that was just the way that we showed love. My mom was not wasn't really big on receiving gifts. She could actually, her greatest gift was to see us actually eat. She loved to see, her way of loving and receiving love was just that, was through actually seeing the smiles on us as we would eat her food. But the point I'm making is that was a love language in my family, of acts of service. But when you're in relationships, once again, going back to that issue of expectations, is also recognize that the family that you're going into, or that the people that you're with at your work or whatever, have their own love language. And difficulties in relationships oftentimes happen because we don't really take the time to understand, or for that matter, study what is the love language in that family.
It's interesting. I see some chatter. This seems to be a really big concept that people are noticing in their own families. But I see LEC in the chat room. Your expectations are who you are, and if you let them go, it's like losing yourself and who you really are. And Ellie, interesting comment that you feel like you are losing yourself if you let go of your expectations. And I can see how it could feel that way, but I challenge you to think of it this way, that in holding on rigidly to our expectations, we can also lose ourselves, because our peace is lost in the shoulds and the demands that we place on others. It is something we simply cannot control, how others, treat us. Mm-hmm. And when we place expectation on them, we're often disappointed. I once heard somebody say, I have great relationships with all my friends. And I thought, okay, I want to hear your magic. What's the magic? And she said, I have no expectations. Mm-hmm. I have no expectations. Mm-hmm. I take what they give, the good, and I let go of the bad, and I have no expectations. And she says, because of that, I have great relationships. And there's wisdom in that.
Well, in some ways, though, you're, to say it a different way, because you obviously and naturally want to experience the love, the appreciation, the kindness from that person. So there is some level of an expectation from that other person. But I think what is so beautiful about what you're saying is that she meets people where they're at. She's not necessarily trying to bring them to something that she is or what her expectations are. And if you're meeting someone where they're at, and that's what I love about Christ. I mean, Christ, his whole life was about meeting people where they were at. You know, his coming in the manger, his coming in this cave, you know, during, you know, in the messiness of a world. And he came to where people are at. He could have easily been born in a temple. He could have been born amongst the religious elite. He could have chosen to be born among the noble and the wealthy people. Yet Christ chose to be born in a manger that was used, to be quite honest with you, was a place where they would, when it was raining and when it was cold, that the shepherds would keep their flock in this cave. And so it was a mess. I mean, imagine a wet sheep for days and days living in this cave when it was wet, when it was a rainy season. And so that Christ could choose to be born in that mess just kind of reveals to us that he met us where we're at. Because why? We're messy people. We if we truly recognize how and who we are, that we are, that, as the Bible says it, that we all fall short of his glory. Sure. That yet he meets us there. He's not this God that's so far off saying, well, if you just love me a little bit more, then I'll love you. It's like, no, I'm going to come down to you and I'm going to meet you where you're at. And I think in adding to what you were saying, Roxanne, is having that expectations that, yes, I do have some level that in any relationship, it requires a mutual amount of love, kindness, and respect, but also not setting expectations on people that's not them. It's meeting them with what they can feed us. It's meeting them where they're at.
What they're capable of giving.
Right.
He didn't place demands on us. He came to us and sacrificed, himself, which I love that you brought that in. I mean, that's so true. I mean, I do think our expectations are really only as good as the unspoken, as the similarity between those unspoken rules that we live by.
Exactly.
If they're different, our expectations are going to be disappointment. And we know we're all different. I mean, everyone in the world is so different. That's what makes us such an interesting world. And so we cannot expect that everyone is going to have been raised with the same philosophies, because our parents' philosophies came from somewhere else, from their parents' philosophies. Okay. And so each of our family systems and the ways that we relate stem from somewhere so much deeper. And if we place demands on people to be different or to merge over into ours, it's a losing battle. It becomes a battle of the wills, my way or my way. And that, we lose the peace of the season, right? The magic of the moment is the magical Christmas season is immediately gone.
Exactly. Once again, everyone, this is Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls, and we're grateful that you're here with us on this Tuesday night. Please join us if you'd like to. You can call in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can join the chat room at ancientfaith.com. Just click on the Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls banner. We also want to encourage you to join us on all throughout the weeks. We try to, as Roxanne mentioned beautifully earlier, that we try to encourage you with some words of encouragement daily, just to kind of lift you up throughout the day, share with you some studies that we find are very helpful in your own walk of faith and your relationships as well. So we do that on our Facebook page. All you have to remember is Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. So if you put Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls in the banner of Facebook, you'll get that. If you have an Instagram account, we also have an Instagram account. Once again, you would just simply put Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls, and you can be part of our Instagram family as well. We just want to make sure that you're connecting to us. And if you would like to hear our sermons that we give, and I will tell you that almost every sermon that I give and share as a priest, and just so everyone knows, it'll be 10 years as being a priest in the church of my home parish, by the way, will be this Sunday, which is hard to believe, Roxana, that 10 years have gone by so quickly.
The age of our son.
That's right, exactly.
That's how I remember it.
And so that'll take place this Sunday. But if you'd like to listen to some sermons that really we try to merge. We're all about practical Christianity. So if you want to join and listen to our sermons, you can find them on Ancient Faith. Just simply click on the God First sermons, and that'll be changing soon to a different title. But for now, it's God First sermons. So please connect with us on that as well.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. It's so exciting to read the chat room here in our break. And we'll be right back to talk about more difficult relationships.
Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls with Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne Lowe will be back in a moment. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-AF-radio. They would love to hear from you.
From Constantina R. Palmer, the author of The Scent of Holiness. The Sweetness of Grace is a collection of stories derived from conversations with Orthodox nuns, monks, and lay people, along with experiences of Orthodox life in South Korea, Greece, and North America. Those who enjoyed Everyday Saints will enjoy these similar stories from other parts of the Orthodox world.
I felt like I had received so many blessings and so many beautiful stories from truly struggling people. I wanted to put this in the second book. The biggest difference, though, is in the second book, it isn't just with nuns. It's with lay people. It's with a couple of monks. It's stories of our priest in Thessaloniki and a variety of things, my professors at the university. So it's more broad in scope.
You can find both The Sweetness of Grace and The Scent of Holiness at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne Lowe. Do you have a question for the Lowe's? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-AF-radio. Here once again is Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
Well, welcome back to Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. We're so happy that you've joined us this Tuesday evening. Our topic is dealing with difficult relationships. And it's been a really chattery chat room tonight. And it's so interesting to read all the comments. I noticed under Ellie's comment, in talking about managing the expectations and whether we should have them or not, she says maybe this is why we don't match with everyone, and only with some are we really happy. And that's so true, because in meeting people where they're at in our expectations, we can't place demands on people to be different, and having the expectations and holding on to the expectation makes us unhappy. Mm-hmm. So what is that middle ground? And that is deciding how close we end up being with this other person. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something to be said for that. If somebody doesn't walk in showing my same similar love language and doesn't do things all the same ways I do them and has completely wildly different values and rules, I don't want to lose my peace over it, but I may not get as close to that individual as somebody else who has more shared and similar features that defines their family. And I think, we've talked about this before, Nick, but it's something that attracted me so much to you is so how many of the shared family values that we had. And in looking at you, I saw so much of my dad. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of an immediate sort of connection to good and safe and good. Mm-hmm. And so I do think in having expectations, or choosing not to have them, what we can choose is how close we allow ourselves to get to somebody who doesn't kind of meet us where we're at in terms of what we're hoping for.
I love that. And as you were talking, it just came to my mind. I was thinking, so if we kind of understand that each of us are like an emotional bank account, and so just think about this for a moment. If all of us have our own emotional bank account, not everyone that's in our life is going to be depositing into our emotional bank account. In fact, sometimes they may not provide us anything other than just being in our life, and so we may be the ones who are actually depositing in them. And maybe we're the ones who are listening to them. Maybe we're the ones who are showing compassion towards them. Maybe they don't feed us emotionally the way that we need to be fed. And what Christ, I believe, shares with us throughout Scripture, and really our church tradition tells us, is that not everyone's going to feed us. And so when you have that expectation that, look, if I have this basic belief that not everyone that's in my life is going to feed my walk of life, then I recognize that I've got to find people who do. And I can only do that if I'm around people that I feel can do that are people that, whether they be priests, whether they be good friends who are godly people, or people that we feel that make us better. And you should always be around people, or at least have friends in your life that are challenging you to be better. And I think when you take the perspective of, is this person feeding me, and If they're not, I don't need to place any expectations because that's all they can give me. I'm just going to meet them where they're at, that they may not have the abilities, the gifts, the talents, whatever it may be, to feed me in that way. It's okay. I don't have to shun them out. I don't have to push them away. I just simply recognize that they can't feed me that way. But I find someone else who can deposit in me, who can feed me emotionally, who can deposit in my emotional bank account.
And another question has popped up in the chat room. How do you deal with critical parents during the holidays or any family members who criticize you? And this is one that I've actually come across in my practice quite a bit is coming back into contact with parents or family members who sort of remind us of what we're lacking. And as I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of research about this that we again typically come back to as adult children in relating with our family structure or family system the ways that we did in adolescence. So what are parents trying to do? They're trying to teach their adult children how to be better, right? They're trying to encourage us to make better choices or make better financial moves. And, they still feel and are craving some level of control. There's some fear in aging parents of losing complete control of their adult children. And so often that can come across as criticism. And so the family system often goes back to that. So, as adult children, we are really challenged to respond differently than we did in adolescence. So we may not engage it. We might thank them for their, feedback or concern, but sort of move on into a different direction. And one of the most common stages I hear this happening in is once adult children have babies. And there's a lot of advice given as often as criticism about how they're raising them, whether they choose to let the child sleep in the bed with them, or when they remove the pacifier, or how well they're socializing the child, or how they're disciplining the child, and the use of timeout versus spanking. And I could go on. And really the best advice or sort of encouragement I give folks is, hey, don't personalize it, because it is so much more about them than it is about you. Mm-hmm. It's the unspoken rules they were raised with. It's the fear of losing control of their children. It's the fact that they're aging. There's a lot more going on for them in those comments, in making those comments, than it is about you. So I try to sort of, what I would encourage is accept with grace and move on to something new. Mm-hmm. Don't personalize it. Don't engage it. And, you can contemplate it on your own if it's something worth minding or integrating or internalizing or thinking about, or if it's something that you don't really think applies because you have a different value, you've individuated it and moved on.
Mm-hmm. To be honest with you too, it's the fact that we really can't change people. We can't change how they act, what they say. All we can choose is how we choose to let it impact us. And I think I love that idea of just kind of understanding that sometimes in those situations, the parent may just be, it just might make them feel good that they're still in a role. Yes, that they're still needed. So I think it's important.
Yes, and what is their love language? Mm-hmm. Often mothers, it's giving to their children. So there's quite a few more questions that have popped up in the chat room, and I definitely see a call coming in. We'll go to the call.
Hello, this is Healthy Minds, Healthy Souls. Is this Courtney?
It looks like we just lost that call. Another anonymous question that has just come in is, seeing family at this time of year causes a lot of stress in my marriage. My husband does not think that my family is a good influence on the children and becomes angry. I do agree that my family has issues and do not make us better, as you just said, but they are family. Do you have tips for dealing with the stress on our marriage because of this? And that is a really important question, I would say, because seeing stress in a marriage as a result of an in-law is honestly so typical, and so common. And again, and it's what is it stemming from? Those unspoken rules a lot of the times. So tips for dealing with it, honestly, what I would say is, you kind of go back to, why am I relating with this person to begin with? They are family, and I have to do what works. Because if my style of relating to these parents is causing a disruption in my marriage, then my ultimate goal of a happy and peaceful marriage is being cost. Okay, so what I'm doing isn't working. We're married to parents, to in-laws in such a way, but really we're married to our spouses, and in-laws come with the package. So we take what we enjoy and we sort of embrace the rest with a respectful distance. And again, accepting feedback or accepting something that says and letting it kind of go with a grain of salt if you don't agree with it. But you engage in a way that brings peace to your ultimate goal, which is your marriage. And so that needs to be the prevailing foundation upon which we live in these in-law situations.
And just to add to your comments, Roxanne, I think it's important to, and oftentimes I share this in confessions with people in our church, is to be mindful that nothing is absolute. Christ and the church are absolute, but emotions are not absolute. And sometimes what happens in relationships, and especially when dealing with the raising of children or how people can influence them, is you as a parent have the single greatest influence on your child. And sometimes we can think that 30-minute or that 2-day or 3-day, or let's even go even further, that 1 week experience with that family member can unhinge the other 51 weeks that I was with my children. And sometimes our brain thinks in absolute terms that this is going to undermine my children, it's going to undermine. And the reality is that it won't, unless we change ourselves towards that and become that way throughout the year. So one is, I would say, just be cautious that you don't let your mind think of the absolutes. And then second of all, what your children are learning in your nonverbal cues, I would be also aware of. And that is that sometimes if they see you and your husband or in a situation in which you may be arguing and fighting about the family, about this difficult relationship, that too is teaching them that either A, we can't resolve that problem together in a healthy way, or that the holiday seasons become so stressful. I mean, sometimes I'm dealing with couples myself that are just, they just cringe when they think about the Christmas season because of the fact that they're being around family and they are stressed about the potential arguments that they may have. Why? Because they grew up in a family in which this was a stressful situation in their own family. And so I would just be cautious about, not allowing yourself to think absolute terms. Don't think that they're having a negative influence, that they're going to change what you've been doing all these other weeks and years with your children. And then make sure that you're being aware of how you are living your life in the presence of your children. Remember that more is caught, as the old saying goes, more is caught than taught.
And exactly, I would 100% agree with you. I just think, also going back to that notion that you have to remember that you cannot change family systems. You cannot change generations of unspoken rules and traditions and values that a family has engaged in. And so holding our partner accountable to change the parent or control the parent in some way actually leads to a very disastrous effect on the marriage. And so there is a strong encouragement that I usually give couples to embrace what you like and let go of the rest, and be cautious of how much you share about what you don't like about a parent or the negative thing that they did that just bothered you. Those are things that I always encourage to kind of just register it and then kind of move on and keep it to yourself, because no good comes from sharing what I don't like about your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your aunt, your uncle. I can promise you that no good comes from that. Okay, so let's, there's so many questions coming in. This seems to be, maybe we should have made this a two-topic show here. Kind of getting back to, I want to stress one other thing, because I know we sort of talked about the emotional state, and to be mindful of our own emotional state and look for the best in others and be merciful. But I think one thing we have to remember is that we all have something that I like to call a stress personality. What's a stress personality? It's who we are under pressure. And we talked about this a little bit last week, Nick, you remember. And unfortunately, over the holidays, because many of us are picking up on all the stress of the holidays, we are existing not in our best self, we are existing in our stress personality. And so instead of kind of putting our best foot forward, we are easily bothered by things that we normally would be kind of not bothered by. We don't laugh at the joke we get mad at the joke. That sarcastic comment just went right in the wrong direction. And so I think we have to really pay attention to the idea that, not only are we probably more in our stress personality, maybe slightly more irritable or impatient, but others are as well. And so when I find myself getting frustrated with somebody or an in-law, I have to remember that maybe that's not their best self either. Maybe they are emotionally spent and taxed by the holidays, and maybe they're in their stress personality. And what I don't like maybe right now is their stress personality, not their whole self. And I think we have a tendency of being black or white, all or nothing. I don't like all of you now. Your sister is horrible. No, that's just who she was under pressure in that particular moment.
Right.
So I think we have to keep it in perspective.
Exactly. And I think that, if we go back to this, the reason for this season, that here we are celebrating the birth of Christ, that all these parties that we go to, all these events that we're connected to, all this family dinner is because we're celebrating the birthday of our Savior. And I don't want to lose the beauty behind why we are really having this event, why these events are actually taking place that do at times cause stress in our relationships. And the challenge that we have to do is always to come back to that place of, if God was merciful to me, then I need to show that mercy. Because the Bible says that the wages of sin, the wages of how our life was pre-December 25th, pre the birth of Christ, the wages of sin, the Bible says, was death. It wasn't that you got a slap on your wrist and that you just went home and that it was over. It was that your life literally was over. There was no afterlife. There was no promise. And so God inserts that. And I love the fact that he inserts that. He inserts mercy. He inserts grace. And so also we should do that. And if there's any people that should kind of get it right, it's we Christians. So even when we're at the grocery store, at the mall, or someone cuts us off in traffic at the mall or takes our parking space, let's take the higher ground. Our approach is, he had mercy, I need to show mercy. He had compassion, I need to have compassion. I need to kind of meet people with where they're at. Meet them where they're at.
Right. And in saying that, I always think about, God is the reason for this season. His, Christ's birth is what we're celebrating. And what has he asked of us? He's asked us to love others as he has loved us. And I always try to remember that because, when I'm judgmental or I'm getting irritable, am I loving others the way he has loved us? And so I think that's, something to come back to as well. I see also another interesting, I love this question. I don't understand why, from a religious point of view, we have emotions like fear, hurt, anger. Psychologically, they are, I guess, defense mechanisms, but religiously, they hold us back from love. So why are they present? Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think that to understand, it's impossible for us to understand the mind of God. But in a short kind of just message, I would say to you that God created us to experience every emotion. And in every emotion, fear, anger, there are positives and there are negatives. I guess you could say there's almost a fine line between us using them in an unhealthy way or using them in a healthy way. So let's take, for example, fear. Fear is not in and of itself unhealthy. In fact, fear at times can motivate us. It can help us to be the people that God wants us to be. The fear of potentially not excelling, or the fear of us not doing what God's will is, might at times help us to become the people that we want to be. Not that we live a faith that's based and rooted in fear, but if it helps to motivate us and to root us. For example, if a natural emotion of being afraid of a family member who's just been sick or diagnosed with an illness, if that fear causes you to get on your knees and to pray, then that's a healthy thing that you've used it for. Anger the same way. I love the way Christ, I don't love the way, but I think it's kind of interesting how Christ gets angry in the Bible. And his emotions are so much so that the Bible says that it's turning over tables, and he's very frustrated because they were selling, there were money changers, they call it, but back in those days, they were people that were selling sheep that was being used during Passover, during what we call today Pascha, the sacrificing of the lambs, and they were doing that in the church, in the temple, and Christ found that totally unacceptable and inappropriate, so much so that he got angry. So if that anger allows us to use it in a healthy way that challenges us, then it's great. It's when it's out of our control, when it's becoming unhealthy, that it's something that I would be caught, that we need to be aware of. And so those things, I think the way that we would approach it is how in which we're utilizing them to motivate us to be the people that God wants us to be. We shouldn't run from them. They are natural parts of who we are as people, but that God gives us those emotions so that we can, so that there's nothing that was left out of the equation. There's nothing that's left out of our DNA. That just like God experienced everything, he was fully God and a fully human being who experienced everything. God also said, I'm not going to hold anything back from my children, that I want them to experience everything, every emotion, from fear, anger, love, etc.
Absolutely.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for